There are some stories that don't sit softly in the chest. They don't land like gentle snowfall or settle like dust. They drop heavy like a cinder block through your rib cage, and you feel every jagged edge of it. The story of Sara Sharif is one of those, a 10-year-old girl whose life was carved into bruises. A child who should have been protected, not just by her family, but by every adult, every institution, every single system built to catch children before they hit the ground. But they didn't catch her, they watched her fall, and then they wrote reviews asking why gravity exists. Sara's death wasn't just a failure, it was a symphony of failures, a full orchestra of adults playing all the wrong notes. But the loudest instrument, the drum echoing through every missed chance, every unopened file, every swallowed concern, was fear of racial insensitivity. Because Sara wasn't just a child. She was a mixed-race child, Polish mother, Pakistani father, living in a Britain that pretends to be colourblind while tripping over its own anxieties the moment a brown face enters a safeguarding meeting. Her very existence disarmed the people meant to protect her. She was too complicated for their neat categories, too sensitive for their confident interventions, too racially layered for their courage. And that right there is the part nobody wants to talk about. Let's start at the beginning, not the beginning of her life, but the beginning of her invisibility. Sara grows up split between her mum and her dad. There were early concerns, domestic violence, instability, arguments that left paperwork trails. Professionals knew her name before her name made the news. They had her on record. They had signals. They had warnings. But in 2019, the courts hand custody to her father anyway. Why? Because British family courts are allergic to acknowledging risk unless it's smacking them in the face wearing a neon vest, and they are especially hesitant when the household in question isn't white, because cultural considerations and respecting heritage become the excuses that swallow safeguarding logic whole. You could almost imagine the courtroom conversation. Are there red flags? Yes. But cultural nuance? I guess. Excellent. Say no more. And little by little, the system backs away, not because the risk is low, but because the politics are high. Fast forward to school. Sara's turning 8. She suddenly begins wearing a hijab. Now listen, in a Pakistani family, a girl wearing a hijab at 8 can be normal, sure. But here's the part the professionals didn't touch, because they didn't want to lose their jobs. Her stepmother didn't wear one. None of the other women around her wore one. And more importantly, Sara didn't wear it before. Then suddenly she did, every day, consistently, covering her head and neck. That alone should have made someone suspicious. Children don't adopt religious clothing in isolation. Something usually motivates it. Family, community, identity, pressure, or concealment. Yes, concealment. And that's exactly what it was. Because underneath that hijab were bruises, marks, injuries, evidence of pain that no scarf should ever be asked to hide. The school noticed bruises on her face and neck. They raised concerns. They documented things. They tried, but they didn't push. Not the way they would have with a white child. Not the way they would have with a child whose circumstances didn't scream, don't offend, don't overstep, don't be accused of xenophobia. Let me say the quiet part out loud. When a white child shows up with injuries, the system leaps into action like a superhero origin story. When a mixed-race child does, suddenly everyone's on an ethics committee. Suddenly it's, let's not jump to conclusions. We don't want to stereotype. We need to consider cultural context. We must show sensitivity. Sensitivity killed her. Then came homeschooling, a classic move in British abuse cases. Parents pull the child from school, professionals lose visibility, safeguarding dims to candlelight. But again, nobody fought it. Nobody escalated. Nobody said, hold on, isn't this the same child with bruises last term? Why is visibility decreasing? Nobody asked why a girl who loved school suddenly vanished. A home visit was scheduled to the wrong house. Let me say that again, because the absurdity demands it. They went to the wrong house, the wrong address, the wrong building. It's like trying to save a drowning person by knocking on every door on the street except theirs. Professionals knocked, no answer. They left, case reviewed, ticked, closed. Imagine writing that in your diary. Child possibly unsafe, checked wrong home, unclear status, moving on. And still, through all of this, everyone involved felt the prickling discomfort of race. You can feel it reading the public review. Neighbours literally admitted they didn't report their concerns because they feared being labelled racist. And that's Britain for you, a country where people would rather let a child die than risk an accusation. Not an actual act of racism, but the appearance of it. That's how shallow the moral spine runs. Now, let's talk about mixed-race children specifically, because this is where the silence becomes structural. Sara was Polish and Pakistani, two cultures with different expectations, different norms, different gender traditions, different expressions of childhood. Professionals didn't know which cultural framework to apply, and instead of asking real questions, instead of saying, "Forget culture, is this child safe?" they froze. Britain's institutions treat mixed-race children like diplomatic incidents. Everyone wants to be polite. Everyone wants to tread lightly. Everyone wants to avoid the Twitter storm. And in doing so, they forget the basics. A bruised child is not a cultural artifact. A crying child is not a heritage puzzle. A frightened child is not a political landmine. A child is a child. And children need protection, not institutional cowardice. Let's talk about the part that makes my blood boil. Mixed-race kids are often seen as more resilient. There's an unspoken belief, a vile one, that they can adapt to complicated households. People assume their identities are already layered and complex, so any instability around them is normalized. That is racist. That is lazy. And that mindset kills. Sara wasn't complex. She wasn't an ethnic chessboard. She wasn't a symbol. She wasn't a cultural balancing act. She was a 10-year-old girl who needed someone to give a damn. Instead, she got a system paralyzed by optics. The post-mortem found dozens of injuries, fractures, bruises, burn marks, healing injuries and fresh ones. Some caused days before her death, some weeks. Her body was a timeline, a diary of violence, a map of pain. You could close your eyes and trace her injuries like reading Braille, and it would tell you the same story over and over. Nobody intervened. Because everyone hesitated, because everyone feared one word, racist. Imagine choosing branding over a child's survival. Imagine weighing optics against bones. Imagine letting a child slip through your fingers because the colour of her father's skin made you uncomfortable. That's what happened. No metaphors needed. The review explicitly says it. Professionals, neighbours, schools, all voice the same fear. We didn't want to appear racially insensitive. That is how a system participates in violence without ever raising a hand. Let's step back and zoom out, not to excuse, but to understand the landscape. Britain claims to be multicultural on paper, multicultural on glossy brochures, multicultural on council posters during Black History Month, but in practice, it's multiracial until something goes wrong. Then suddenly it becomes, let's not offend. Let's tread carefully. Let's wait for more evidence. Let's avoid cultural misunderstandings. Let's not risk a headline. But guess what? When institutions are too scared to act, abusers gain confidence. Silence is a green light. Invisibility is permission. And Sara's abusers had both. Now here's the part where I look Britain in the eye. Being mixed race shouldn't make you invisible. It shouldn't make your pain political. It shouldn't make your bruises culturally ambiguous. It shouldn't make your suffering a debate around context. But the truth is, the British safeguarding system was not built for children who straddle worlds. It was built for tidy identities, tidy families, tidy narratives. Sara didn't fit that. So the system folded. Let me put this bluntly. Sara wasn't just failed, she was failed for reasons, directly linked to her mixed heritage. Her identity made adults hesitate. Hesitation made silence. Silence made violence, and violence ended her life. There were 15 missed chances, 15 moments someone could have saved her, 15 times a professional could have said, "This doesn't feel right. Something is off. This child needs help," but they didn't. because they didn't want to get it wrong, because they didn't want to be the white teacher questioning a hijab, because they didn't want to be the neighbor reporting the Pakistani dad, because they didn't want backlash from the community or social media, because they didn't want to fight the court decision, because the optics were too noisy. Nobody wants to say it like this, but I will. Sara died because grown adults cared more about their reputations than her safety. When you strip away the bureaucracy, when you peel back the 70-page safeguarding reviews, when you remove the polite language, the carefully worded conclusions, the lessons learned paragraphs nobody will implement, when you burn away all the euphemisms, you're left with one truth. This was preventable. Preventable from orbit. Preventable even with your eyes closed. Preventable in ways that make your stomach twist. And it didn't happen because the system didn't know. It happened because the system didn't want to offend. Let me end where it hurts. Sara was 10, an age where children still draw wonky hearts on scrap paper and write their names backwards, an age where they laugh too loudly, cry too easily, and believe the world is safer than it is. She didn't get to grow up. She didn't get to heal. She didn't get to be a child without bruises. She didn't get the kind of protection she deserved. Sara deserved a country with a backbone, a system with clarity, a neighborhood that spoke up, professionals who didn't hide behind sensitivity. She deserved to live, and she didn't, because we, collectively, were more afraid of accusations than consequences. So here is my final thought. Spoken without fear, without hesitation, without the politeness that keeps unaliving children. If your cultural sensitivity stops you from saving a child, you're not culturally aware, you're morally bankrupt. If your desire not to offend outweighs your duty to protect, you shouldn't work with children. And if your system cannot safeguard a mixed-race child because adults panic at the word racism, then your system is already broken. Sara's story must not be just a headline, not a case study, not a learning opportunity. It must be a reckoning for every institution that hid behind sensitivity while a child was being tortured behind closed doors. Let her story be a mirror that Britain can no longer avoid. Let her name be a warning to every safeguarding board in this country. Children don't die from bruises. They die from silence. And the next time a mixed-race child shows signs of pain, fear of racial insensitivity better not be the reason they're left to suffer. Not again, not ever. May you eternally rest in peace, Sara.